Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. It is so nice to see all of you today. It's so nice to hear and see our choir again. Welcome back for the fall, and you sound great. Thank you. Thank you. If you're visiting with us this morning, you are our honored guest, and we are so glad you're here. Please stop by the welcome table just outside this door in Elliott Hall after worship. We'd love to get to know you and introduce ourselves to you as well. Each Sunday, we begin our service with the lighting of the flaming chalice. And this morning, the chalice lighting words come from Sarah Getty McNeil. Come in from the crisp morning air outside. Come in wearing the autumn sunlight on your face. Come carrying the turning of the seasons in your heart. Whatever and however the greatness of life is speaking to you now, you are welcome here in our circle of friends. And now I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and let us sing together our opening hymn, number 38. Well, it is a beautiful day outside. It's going to be sunny and warm, but the shade and the breeze are now too cool to belong properly to summer. It's a perfect day to be outdoors and enjoy the coming of autumn. It's the kind of day that's so pretty, you'd be forgiven for forgetting that the earth is in trouble. Not pretend trouble, not even avoidable trouble, not any longer. Some of the trouble is already irreversible. Somewhere in the world, right now, people are not enjoying the beauty of a change in season, but the suffering of climate crisis. That's why this coming Friday, there will be a global climate strike, and Unitarian Universalists across the country are participating. It's our religious values that take us out of our homes, away from our desks, onto the streets, and into the action. I hope that all of you can join us. But whether or not you can leave work or school to participate, one thing that all of us can do at any time is pray. So I invite you now to pray or reflect with me. Spirit of earth and sky, ground and limitless limit of our being. Our hearts are full of grief at the wreck we're making of your earth, our home. But we don't have time for sackcloth and ashes. Today we have just enough time to pray and to act. Bless all the young people who are leading us into a more hopeful future. Give them the courage to speak and to sing and to shout, even when their voices shake. Bless us with the wisdom to follow them, even when they make mistakes, even when we are not sure where they are going. Bless us with the humility to make real changes in our lives, to recognize that recycling won't be enough anymore, that this is a time for sacrifice. Bless all those who strike around the globe. Bless all those who are risking their jobs or their status, who are giving up pay or security to make a future their children can believe in. And press upon our hearts to reveal what we might risk, what we might give up for our children and for their children. Bless the future generations of this world with resilience and tenacity, and remind us that our actions today are the only power that blessing has. And bless this crooked but beautiful world. Remind us that it is good, deeply, wonderfully good, and that it does not belong to us. It is not ours to use, it is ours to protect and to pass on. Amen.
Into this house of light we come, to sing that which is good,
Well, good morning. And good morning, choir. Good to have you back in church. Vocal cords all rested after a long time. Did any of you sing during the summer, or did you really rest? You sang in the summer. Okay. Well, I hope not too much. Well, liberals love to critique everything in life, so to speak. And if you want to find an objection to anything, you ask a liberal. So it does the heart good to have liberals critique themselves. And no one can do that better than our former president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Bill Schultz, who actually doesn't hold back much. And in fact, our morning is going to be dedicated to some of the soft spots of liberalism, areas that we certainly need to improve upon. And here's what Bill says. Liberalism, whether in its political or its religious form, begins with an affirmation of individual liberty, with a conviction that no government or religious hierarchy ought to interfere with the fundamental human rights of the individual or dictate a set of required religious beliefs. Now, this is the source of Unitarian Universalism's vaunted creedlessness. And in the face of political dictatorship or religious authoritarianism, it is an admirable affirmation. The problem comes when liberalism is asked to articulate a vision of the common weal beyond simply the absence of unwarranted political or religious constraints. The fact is that traditional liberalism has little notion of what the good society or the beloved community would look like even if it suddenly emerged. But believe me, we will never solve the problems of tribalism, ecological exploitation, or growing disparity between rich and poor without a clear vision of humanity's common bonds. Now, let me put what I'm saying in the form of a homely example borrowed from Fred Hirsch's book, Social Limits to Growth. Imagine that you're standing in a crowd watching a parade. Now, because you can't see very well, you get up on your tiptoes. But when you do that, you block someone behind you who in turn has to stand on his or her tiptoes. The result is that before too long, nobody can see any more clearly than they could in the first place, and in addition, everybody's exhausted from standing on their toes. Now, the solution which traditional liberalism can offer in this situation is the assurance that no one can force you to stand in any particular place, that everybody's got as much right as the next person to see the parade if they can. But what liberalism doesn't help us do is to work out a solution which will benefit just about everybody. And the reason liberalism fails us here is because the solution to our problem will need to be a group solution, not just an individual one. If one person gets down off her tiptoes, she's worse off than everyone else. Only if the group agrees that the shorter people should stand in the front, for example, and everybody covenants with everybody else to refrain from standing on tiptoes, can we work out a satisfactory solution. Unitarian Universalism has proudly proclaimed that its first principle is freedom of religious belief. That in our congregations, no one can tell you what to believe about things religious. And that's fine if our major interest is overcoming the dictates of fundamentalism or some other religious orthodoxy. Ours is the religious equivalent to assuring people that they have the right to stand anywhere they want in the crowd. But that's not enough if our major challenge is to design a religion which can truly speak to the problems of the 21st century. I submit that the fundamental reason 90% of our young people leave Unitarian Universalism, the fundamental reason so many people drift into our faith a few years and then right back out, the fundamental reason we are so relatively small in numbers and influence in this world is because we have refused to supplement our passion for individual liberty with a vision of the moral community. Without a clear vision of the moral community, a liberal faith has little to offer a world divided by ethnic or racial nationalisms. The only way to combat the spirit of narrowness and fear is with a vision of bounty and justice. Without a compelling image of the moral community, a liberal faith has little to say in defense of a fragile earth. The only way to restore a balance between the human and the natural worlds is a holistic vision which embraces them both. Without a prophetic call to the moral community, a liberal faith can hardly encounter an excessively lavish lifestyle, for if the one who dies with the most toys wins, then materialism is the meaning of life. And without a spiritual alternative, there's no reason to give it up.
Tomorrows, let our voice together near, not to grieving or receiving, everyone has honor here. Welcome, 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 Alleluia, glory. Welcome, 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 that is all you do. Be tomorrow's let our hearts together near, after giving or receiving, everyone has honor here. Welcome, 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 Alleluia, glory. Welcome, 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 Lord is all you do. We pray.
We have a few announcements this morning. A reminder of small group ministry. Please be sure to sign up. This is a long standing, my goodness, we must be approaching 16, 18 years of having small groups in our congregation. We probably have a total of anywhere between 14 and 15, maybe 16 small groups of about 10 people each, meet once a month and have a chance to discuss some really profound things in life. It's not a political group, it's not a book group, it's not a therapy group. It's just the chance to get better acquainted and examine some things that you carry in your hearts, stuff you've been thinking about. And it's a wonderful, wonderful program. Sign up for it. You could do it online. You can also do it after church at one of the tables. Also want to point out, my goodness, this is such a busy place. The environmental ministry keeps on churning out phenomenal programs. And just take a look at everything in our order of service, of the not only the richness of the programs, but also the diversity of the programs. We're going to be starting, or I'm going to be trying to facilitate a book discussion about the African American experience understood through literature. And we're going to be touching upon some African American novelists. And you can take a look as a, my goodness, just a wonderful segment here in the order of service. Tells you a little more information about that. And we'll be beginning on Monday, September 30th, which gives you 2 weeks to read the first book we're going to tackle, The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. It's actually more of a historical novel, but it's a phenomenal book, and it'll generate a lot of discussion, I assure you. We're also going to have some TED Talks and some YouTube clips to kind of augment the whole discussion. Don't need to register. Isn't that a refreshing change? You don't need to register. Just come and read it. If you only read 3/4 of the book, come anyway. Join in the discussion. Also want to announce that the RRC, the Refugee Committee here, needs some new blood and people with strong backs. We furnish all the apartments of refugees who come here, and sometimes it's a 4-story walk-up, and you know, when you hit a certain age, it's hard to carry a couch up 4 flights of stairs. So if we've got some folks who are younger and can handle that, the commitment is not huge. We resettle an apartment about once a week, and it takes about 2 hours. And if you have that time, please do that. It often is during the week, so you don't even have to give up a weekend to do that. So talk to me, or next week, be sure to sign up at that RRC table at the activity fair. And also, I mentioned this briefly last time, because of the cell phone epidemic of just people, so many people get calls in church. I don't know, it makes you wonder. And so we're not exactly imposing, but we are recommending that if that happens, if your cell phone goes off in church, then please, after church, go to the office and plunk down $10. This is not a means by which the church will get rich, but it'll just make you feel so much better. Kind of an expiation of sins. I mean, right there, you can do that. But what we do need in more significant donations than $10 is the capital campaign. As you know, we started this in May. We got off to a tremendous start, 60% of the $500,000 goal in the bag. We need, then the summer came. Boom. The summer can just bring a lot of things to a halt. So please let us remuster that energy, complete the job. There will be pledge cards for the capital campaign, pledges over a 3-year period. Please be so kind as to pick up a pledge card, make your donations, and as you can see, our first example here is getting double windows for our chapel. It will be enormous energy saving, fixing the pillars out front so the church doesn't topple over in the next few months. Small things like that. So please be sure to help out if you can. This time, speaking of money, the offering will gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another and welcome each other to First Unitarian Church. happens to people after they die? Now, if you ever were a parent of a young child, you were certainly asked this unsettling question, usually at bath time, if I remember. And if your personal theology leaned a little left, well, you probably wish you were still a true believer. Pat answers about life after death are some of the perks of traditional religion. But you probably went ahead anyway and comforted your child with sweet stories of supernatural resting places. And then you probably made a note to self, time to find a Unitarian Sunday school. What happens to people after they die is not just a child's question. It's the question that I am asked most frequently by adults. And I think the real question, tinged with a bit of anxiety, asks, is this all there is? Do the deceased live on eternally as spirits? Are loved ones reunited in heaven? Or does everything cease forever when the brain no longer functions at the point of death? Now, although scientific evidence denies the possibility of immortal life, people the world over, covering all cultures and religions, people all over, still seem compelled to think about death as a transition, not an end. For thousands of years in pre-scientific times, people refused to believe that life is limited to a temporal existence. Attachments to loved ones simply cannot be severed when the last breath is taken. You're born, you love, you die, it's over. How meaningless is that? In ancient Israel and Egypt, the dead were buried with very practical earthly things to help the dead along into their next lives. It was like a launch into the hereafter. Now, although details about the afterlife vary according to one's religion, it's commonly believed that people continue to exist eternally in some form. Humanity has always believed that and continues to believe that even in these contemporary times. Today, theologians and biologists and brain scientists and social scientists and psychologists all study this phenomenon of a likely innate human desire to extend life beyond the physical boundaries of the world. The apparent explanation for this belief in an afterlife is referred to, and you'll love this, it's referred to as terror management theory. The contention is that belief in immortality can alleviate psychological distress associated with one's own awareness of impending death. The thought of life continuing in some conceivable way provides the comfort sought and precludes whatever science may dictate otherwise. Now, instead of calling it terror management, most people prefer the word faith. And why not? Strong theological arguments have been constructed for centuries in support of this faith of life everlasting. Nonetheless, it seems that the more specific you get about what this eternal life looks like, the more uneasiness is generated. I mean, the absurd descriptions about heaven only make that destination less appealing. You know, in a journal called U.S. Catholic, which is actually a pretty liberal magazine, one of the writers, a priest, asks, and this is in fact the heading of this article, the priest asks, "Will heaven be boring?" Well, that kind of gets to the heart of things. Especially since, you know, good practicing Catholics can't help but wonder, how much harp playing can I really tolerate for all eternity? Curiously, the article claims that heaven is not about eternal rest, but eternal activity and, in their words, eternal social concern. Wow. And this becomes a ridiculous premise, since there can't be any concern in heaven. Concern presupposes that something can go wrong. Otherwise, we wouldn't care. What could possibly go wrong in heaven? Now, one of the classic examples of ridiculing heaven as a place is found in Mark Twain's famous short story, Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven. Published back in 1907 as a piece in Harper's Magazine, the story feels like Mark Twain anticipated today's vast explorations in space in which, well, heaven has not yet been discovered. The story finds Captain Stormfield taking a wrong turn on his travel up to heaven, having decided to race against a comet across the sky. And so the story describes his cosmic journey with lots of questions about angels and harp playing forever and ever, with the captain questioning whether or not that's the right destination for him. Now, although Mark Twain can make most people laugh about a mythological resting place for all eternity, the human imagination never really ceases to contemplate some existence, even if it's indefinable, some existence beyond death. And Christian theology, especially theology that was formed in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, interpreted God to make faith more palatable, while at the same time maintaining the comforting thought that death is not the final word. Liberal theologians at that time contributed much to tossing old-time religion into the ecclesiastical wastebin by posing a multitude of questions. Liberals asked, how can mythological patterns of religion remain relevant to the modern mind? What is the meaning of God when removed from an anthropomorphic concept? Is the Christian assessment of the human condition still valid in a scientific age? Aren't humans capable of controlling their own destiny? It no longer makes sense that salvation can be found in Jesus Christ alone. Liberals question a transcendent reality and reconceive theology as being more about discovering what is deep and profound in this life. God, in whom we place our care, is largely an attempt, the liberals argue, to avoid taking full responsibility for ourselves in this life. Liberals in general, and Unitarians in particular, underscored the paradoxes in Christian theology, such as conceiving God as three persons in one substance, or God incarnate in Jesus. Liberals dismissed God's characteristics, such as omniscience and eternity. Maybe this is why liberals find themselves in small numbers. Once you declare eternal life as suspect, then we're back to the biggest question of all: what happens to people when they die? Well, liberals have never been known for providing much comfort. How do liberals deliver their theological message? Well, I would say quite poorly. It's mostly just a bunch of questions. We have shown great methods for debunking superstitions, but theology needs to offer more than method. It must also provide, of course, substance. Liberals mostly offer a slate of non-beliefs. There's people asking, where's the beef? Where's the beef? Garrison Keeler made a career of ridiculing Unitarianism's lack of substance. He recounted over and over again these old jokes about Unitarians burning question marks in their front lawn, and how the reason we sing so poorly is that we're reading ahead in the hymn book to make sure we agree with the words. You know, these are old jokes. Bill Schultz's reading this morning kind of scolded Unitarians for failing to articulate a commonly held belief beyond the absence of a creed. Where's the beef? Okay, you creedless, show me what you got. In her novel, Fly Away Home, Marge Piercy has a mother say of her daughters, the girls had been raised Unitarian, which seemed a nice, sensible compromise between having no religion at all and having to lie about what we believe. Enough religion to be respectful, but not enough to get in the way. Yeah. Creeds get in the way. And we are a creedless faith. But we will disappear altogether as a denomination if we continue to sail the seas of religious life as an empty vessel, providing no substance to liberal theology apart from questions and a litany of what we don't believe. Now, personally, I think liberal theology is tied to what it means to live in relationship to death. Liberal theology is shaped by the belief that life has meaning and purpose only because it ends. Identifying what I ought to do with my time, what I ought to do with my life, is predicated on the fact that I will die. And if I believed that my life would last forever, I would never be seized by the need to do really anything with my time. Now, when I return to the same landscape each summer in Bolinas, part of which makes it so poignant is that I may never see it again. My devotion to the ones I love is so precious, exactly because we have to make the most of it. Now, our time together is intensified by the sense that it won't last forever. We need to care for one another because our lives are fragile and finite. Now, so this sense of finitude, life is finite, lies inescapably at the heart of liberal theology. Now, it's a deep devotion to life that we know will end. Life is bound by time. Faith, then, is understood as devotion to someone or something that is vulnerable to loss because it will end. So from a traditional religious perspective, our finitude is viewed as something lamentable and which must be overcome. The premise of all the world's religions is that the highest form of existence is eternal rather than finite. And follow the rules, and you will not be denied eternal life. Now, we need to understand that a liberal theology does not simply resign itself to death, but seeks to improve the conditions of life so that life will live on after we're gone. Life will live on in the future. And that's why liberals fight for ideals that extend far beyond their own lives. A political vision for the future, providing a legacy for generations to come, contribute to our deepest commitment to sustain life into the future. Without our sense of obligation, the future will be lost if we fail to act. Now, I'm thinking specifically now about our commitment to environmental justice. Repealing the clean water regulations, eliminating restrictions on fossil fuel pollution like coal-fired plants, automobile tailpipes, methane emissions, asbestos and pesticides, undercuts our theology of sustaining life on this earth. So we get upset. It's just we don't agree with the policy. It's what's being presented here is a theological lunacy. William James concluded his classic Varieties of Religious Experience by saying, "This world may indeed, as science assures us, someday burn up or freeze, but for those with religious faith, God's existence is the guarantee of an ideal order that shall be permanently preserved." So from a non-liberal religious perspective, the end of the world is ultimately not a tragedy. Let me be specific. Climate change cannot be seen as an existential threat from the standpoint of faith in eternal life. To fully grasp the existential threat to ourselves and to future generations, you have to believe not only that life is finite, but you also must believe that everything that matters, everything that is of value, depends on life as finite. This is exactly what belief in eternal life denies. So I can hear some of you murmuring in protest. Indeed, very religious people can still care about the fate of the earth. The point is that if you care about life in this world as an end in itself, then you automatically adhere to what we call a liberal theology. Faith in eternal life, however, fails to recognize the ultimate purpose of what we do, the ultimate reason it matters how we treat one another and the earth. That is our responsibility There is no other place to wind up forever and ever and ever. Our work here is an end in itself. Faith in eternal life offers the perspective that our ultimate purpose is to serve God and to attain salvation from the hurts and pains of this world rather than care for our shared lives and future generations. Liberal theology makes explicit that caring for each other and future generations and the ecosystem and all the species falls within our finite legacy, and they are ends in themselves. Liberal theology alone does not make one automatically improve the conditions of the world. However, liberal theology does galvanize the necessity for motivating ethical and political commitments. Oh, those Unitarians are so gosh darn political. But do you see why? It's inherent in our liberal theology. We're responsible for life and the continuation of life on this planet. How can that not be political, too? Now, liberal theology, for me, constitutes a difficult life practice. Life remains so fragile since it is sustained only through our commitments. Finitude will not provide any guarantee that we will care for one another in the right way. In fact, it makes it feel oh so much more precarious, especially now during our current administration. Our dependence on one another calls for us to develop institutions of social justice and environmental protections. One of the characteristics of faith is that it must be, to use the jargon, it must be transformational. And I agree. And what is transformational in liberal faith is our practice of care towards every human being to build a genuine and beloved community. That's transformational. What happens to people after they die? Traditional religion likes to provide answers. Many religious people like to make their own assessment of what may follow. Their premise, however, seems always the same. Death is a mere interruption of life. And there's this yearning to make death meaningless, reducing it to a mere transition en route to somewhere else. What about liberal theology and its foundational view that life is finite? Now, I certainly buy into that wholeheartedly, but to be honest, a measure of comfort at the end of life remains a welcome consideration. On a personal note, Mary and I know exactly where our ashes will be scattered someday, along with the dog. It's that spot to where we always return to contemplate life's myriad twists and turns, and also simply to look out upon the beauty of this waterway, this strait that connects Bolinas Lagoon with the ocean. It's a place where we observe the seals at play, and fishermen along the shore cast their lines out onto the sea. It's where people stop and spontaneously, truly, break into dance or song or meditation. It's where dogs retrieve tossed objects thrown far out into the ocean, and where children collect treasures in their pails. Now, our adult children will always return there because they too love it so. And who knows, maybe when the grandchildren are grown, they will return there as well, taking a moment, perhaps, to think that our ashes are mingled with the tides and the sand, the waves. Now, that thought provides comfort for us while contemplating life's end. To be remembered for a generation or two would bring great comfort. I don't think this is a form of terror management, because I am content in my belief that, life is finite. That's how I've come to understand the gift of life and the value of life by virtue of its fragility. Being remembered for another generation or so does not signal triumph over death or views death as a mere transition to eternal life. All it does is provide a little comfort with no strings attached, really. Every farewell after a good visit needs a bit of solace. And so I feel that the nuts and bolts of liberal theology are inextricably tied to our finitude, our finite lives. It provides context for strong motivation to do good, not to do good in order to be rewarded in a future life, but to honor our responsibilities in this world. Because, yes, this is all there is. But what a beautiful gift. So be it. Can we conclude our service turning our hymn books, please, to number 326. As we extinguish the chalice, let's take a brief look at the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, do you follow this rule in order to receive divine favor? Or are you acting out of concern for the well-being of others? Is practicing the golden rule your ticket to salvation and therefore an end in itself? Or is keeping faith with one another an end in itself? Now, since only finite beings are in need of mutual care, does not the golden rule therefore demand that we recognize one another as finite beings for whom it matters how we are treated and, of course, how we treat others? Amen.